Hey, welcome to Vortex Garage. And as you can see, we've got this awesome Mercedes in the shop today. This is a 1990 560 SEL, and as designated by the L in the SEL, this is the long wheelbase version of the W126 chassis. Now, being in 1990, this is toward the end of the W126 model run. The W126 chassis ran from 1979 to 1991. And more specifically, the original version of the W126 ran from 1979 to 1985, and then in 1986 it received a bit of a facelift, which carried it on through the 1991 model year. Now, the 560 and the 560 SEL moniker, well, that designates that this has the larger of the M117 engines, the 5.6 liter. Well, okay, it's a 5547cc, which most people would round down to 5.5 liters, but this is an S-Class, a big, long W126 Mercedes 560. Let's round up 5.6 liters it's going to be. And if you look at the specs here that we're going to put on the video, this engine actually, in its single overhead cam format, outputs quite a bit of horsepower and torque for the 1990 model year. Let's just compare that to some other engines of the time, and this is actually quite a nice, efficient, powerful engine for the time. And actually, it's quite a bulletproof and very well put together engine as well, especially when you look at some of the engines that are available today. This thing, and the whole car in general, is really a tank and really well built. This is quite an awesome car. So, why is it here in the shop? Well, this car is here for a couple small things. It's here for an oil change, and also the owner wanted us to look into the headlights. The headlights are kind of dim, and he's looking to see if we can get a little more nighttime visibility out of them. Now, I've actually already had it up on the lift. We're going to cut to doing, of course, our normal under vehicle inspection. But first, let's go ahead and grab the camera and walk around and show you this awesome Mercedes 560 SEL. All right, and sort of walking down the side, as you can tell, it's going to take a while to get to the end, but this is a really, really nice looking car. Like I said, 54,000 original miles. Can we fit it all in the frame? There we go. All right, so here is our M117 engine, and as you can tell, this thing is extremely clean and really nice condition. This vehicle does have ABS. This does not have the ASR, which was the early traction control, and that same ASR system actually was on some C4 Corvettes, believe it or not. But that ASR traction control was, I believe, optional in Europe, but I don't believe it was on the US spec vehicles of this year. So just to give you a good view underneath, if we take a look here, one thing I did notice, you can see there's some markings on our spark plug boots. I think you might be able to see them a little better from underneath. It does show someone had those wires off to do some spark plugs at some point. We did check the air filter. It was in brand new condition. Of course, we did the oil change. We used some Liqui-Moly 5W40 synthetic, and we put a new MAN filter in. That's where the oil filter goes. Of course, new copper gaskets on everything as well, the drain plug as well as our plug there. We don't want any leaks. The engine itself is pretty leak-free, as you can tell. Did find some service records with the vehicle as we did the inspection, because that's one thing you want to know, were certain things done, was the fluids replaced recently, belt service, etc. And I did see that the belts were done not too long ago, and you can see that they do look pretty new, so that confirmed those are indeed new belts. No leaks or drips on the radiator up here. Nice aluminum mechanical fan, nice thick. See that nice thick aluminum fan there? Not like a plastic fan that could break apart after years and age. The ABS system with all the lines coming off of it. There's your hydraulic reservoir. One thing that's cool, I think we showed on the inspection video, it has dual horns, kind of your town and country horn arrangement. So there's the one horns there, and then we'll show you them underneath. There's the horns underneath. Nice hood ornament. And everyone who knows me knows I love hood ornaments. And hood ornaments is one of those things that's sort of fallen out of favor on cars, but my town car's got one that I like. And well, this Mercedes has got quite a nice one. And man, just going down the road, seeing that hood ornament sticking out is just awesome. It's like opening a bank vault. Give you a good view of the interior. All right, now with the long wheelbase version, you do have the footrest down there. Now, as we go and show you the interior, I did want to go ahead and focus on this rear door panel really quick because we have a couple switches here, and let's show you those. So obviously we have our window switch. We also have a seat heater switch in the rear, which is nice, so heated seats in the rear. But we also have this reclining seat here. So if we take a look at the seat, look at that. Isn't that great? Of course, you've got your rear ventilation back here as well, which is very common in vehicles nowadays, but it wasn't always a thing. You had to really have a nice luxury vehicle to get that back in the day. Headliner's in great condition. It's got a nice sunroof. Everything's in great shape. Again, super nice car. This is definitely one of those cars where it is very comfortable to drive it, but it's also quite comfortable to be riding in the back. All right, we'll check out the front. So here's another thing that's a bit interesting. We have our seat controls on the door, and it was actually Mercedes much earlier than this who actually pioneered and even patented this arrangement. These were designed to be a little more intuitive. When you were moving the seat, it looked like a seat. You know, you have each cushion movement in each direction. It was a little more easy to figure out than just having random buttons on the seat bottom. I'll have to put it on the screen, but I know that patent ran through the 1990s, I believe, and then other car makers started to use it. In fact, our Lincoln Town Car has a very similar arrangement for the seat controls, basically mimicking what Mercedes came up with. So we'll give that credit to Mercedes for coming up with that. And we'll just take a look at the dash here, and I know you're seeing it. The original cell phone is still in it. Or car phone, I suppose we should say. Centel by Motorola. That's pretty awesome. It does have an aftermarket radio, which is very common if you want to get your auxiliary inputs or your Bluetooth. Here you can see some switches. These are for your seat heaters, and also the middle one there is for your horns. Okay, but we have our shifter assembly, we have our switches for our windows and everything, and then we have a nice little compartment here, kind of the accordion style. Everything's in great condition. So this vehicle had the optional passenger side airbag in 1990. I believe that was an option on US spec cars, and the driver's side airbag was, I believe, standard on the 560 SEL for 1990. Now with the passenger side airbag, you do lose the glove box. So you've got a little parcel tray there, and the glove box is sort of replaced by your little console here. And also in the back, there is a couple of compartments, one that has the first aid kit and another one that's empty that you can keep your owner's manual and everything in. Kind of reminds you of an airplane, doesn't it? The captain has requested that everyone put their seatbelts on. There's no turbulence because you're in a Mercedes and it's a nice smooth ride. But we do still ask you to put your trays in the upright position. Maybe turn your seat back upright in the back there instead of reclining, and get ready to hit the Autobahn. Very nice Mercedes gauge cluster. Very signature in design. 54,000 original miles. Like I said, super nice car. Very, very comfortable seats. Very comfortable car. All right, so now that we've walked around it and checked out the interior a little bit, let's go ahead and get this thing up on the lift and do a nice mechanical inspection underneath. All right, let's check this thing out underneath. Well, of course, first we got our tow hook there. And well, first thing that jumps out at me is the horn here, and there's one on the other side. I know that shouldn't be that interesting, but the reason it's interesting is there's a couple of horns here. You can kind of see it through the grill there. And there's another one up here. And I know on some older Mercedes, and maybe this one's the same, this might just be dual notes, but they actually had like two horn settings, one kind of for like, you know, just tooting around town, and one larger horn setting where it would basically blast some information to someone that they need to move. So that's kind of interesting. Anyway, let's take a look mechanically. And first thing we'll take a look at is our radiator assembly, which looks nice and clean. Hoses all look good. Took a look at the belts. They all look really nice. And we'll talk about that in just a second. The radiator lower support here has some signs of undercoating on it, and it looks all very clean. Up in the bumper assembly, again, very clean. No signs of any crash damage or anything like that. So very, very nice. So one thing I did notice was just how super clean everything is under here. Now granted, this is a low mileage vehicle. It only has 52,000 miles, but still that is really clean. And I did notice some paperwork in the vehicle, and I always like to check that out because it gives me an idea of services that were done prior, because when I'm looking at things, certainly I'm inspecting for whatever I see now, but things like transmission, want to know if the fluid had been done recently or if it's original. I was able to see in some prior receipts that yes, the transmission was serviced not too long ago, which we'll talk about. But one of the things I did notice in there was some underbody cleaning that was done, and you can certainly see that. And the reason that's important is, well, first of all, it looks awesome, super clean under here, but it also lets us see very clearly if we have any leaks or seepage from anywhere. And as you can tell, there's a tiny bit of seepage up there. Again, nothing really noteworthy to the owner. It's just something natural that's going to be there. You do see a little bit more seepage on the oil pan, this lower oil pan here. And again, probably not really worth doing or just something to keep an eye on, but there is enough seepage on this one that you can get a little bit of oil on your finger if you run it across the edge here. All right, so a couple interesting things as we move along. There's our oil filter assembly, that canister up there. But the other thing that's neat is here is our motor mount, and attached to it is this little shock absorber. And well, look, there's one on the other side as well. So this no doubt contributes to the smooth running of this vehicle. Look at that, it's got little shock absorbers for the motor mount there. And this one does look a little greasy. That could just be residual. I did notice in that paperwork again, but I know that this did have some power steering fluid service and lines replaced. So that could just be some residual from after it was cleaned and other leaks were fixed. But it seems the engine's very smooth, so I don't see any problems there. So we'll talk suspension a little bit, and then we'll get into steering. So the first thing I noticed on the front suspension is we do see a replaced lower ball joint. The shock absorber appears to be original. There's a tiny bit, again, I don't even know if you call that seepage, just dampness on the shock. To me, it doesn't look too bad. The car rides great. I don't think there's any issues with it, so just something to see. Looking at the other side, again, replaced lower ball joint. Rest of the suspension looks pretty good. I do see also indications that several of the bushings were replaced on the control arms. So that's good, because that can really affect the steering feel and things like that. Now, one thing I did notice, come around back here, and just some cool mounts that it has just for NVH, for this radius rod, and how all the cross members mount, and they got these nice rubber bushings and kind of vibration assemblies and whatnot. It's just cool. It's really well built. So anyway, looking up here, this is the brake wear sensor right there. Of course, our brake hose in the middle, and then behind it is the ABS sensor. And up here, there's supposed to be a plastic bracket that houses them and retains them. And you can see the ABS wire is still in there. But the other side has snapped off, and this wire is no longer retained. So that means this wire is just sort of floating around back here. Luckily, this one's not that long. It doesn't look like it can get itself into too much trouble. But having things retained in their original spots, to me, is always nice, because look at how that just pulls this up out of the way of everything and just minimizes the chance it's going to rub against anything when the suspension's in travel or the wheel's turning. Let's take a look at the other side. On this side, you can see that it's the reverse. The ABS wire is actually the one that's broken off, and it's still got the clip attached to it. Now, what's interesting is I do see that the brake lines have been replaced. So I wonder if I'm not saying they were broken when that happened. It's very common for these to break. So that, it's old plastic. It's probably already was broken. But when I looked at the part, it's a fairly unobtainium part. They're hard to find, but I may have found two of them. And if I did, the only problem is in the pictures, and I'll show you on the video here, these have a hole in the center and they mount over the line. So I got to take a closer look at that and see how do these things actually mount, because if I'm correct, you actually have to separate the brake line and slide it over the brake line, which seems really bizarre, because then I'd have to bleed the brakes just to put a plastic clip on. That seems wrong. So I'm going to double check that. Hopefully I'm wrong on that, but as you can see, the car is a little too high up in the air to take a good look. I can't see, maybe the camera can. But that's one thing. We'll either look at trying to get the OEM retainers or just do something to retain these lines. I want to make sure that they're not going to, like this one, worst case scenario, it can pull all the way out and hit the tire. We don't want that to happen. Tires are nice and new. I think they were done a couple years ago, so they're pretty new in terms of rubber as well. No dry rot or anything. They ride really nice. So let's talk about the steering system. Now, interesting, back in this era, Mercedes was still using recirculating ball type steering, not rack and pinion, which means they had a steering box, which is, come on camera, there it is, steering box, pitman arm, drag link, steering damper, idler arm, and of course your tie rod assemblies on either side. So, and I know some will cringe when I say this, not unlike our 1967 Plymouth Fury, which has a very similar steering setup on it. But again, I'm sure there's some major architectural differences between them, but well, I mean, really, the base architecture is the same. It's that type of steering setup. So, but just sort of interesting. So anyway, when I take a look at this, and I did see indications that the steering box had been rebuilt at some point. Again, I noted also some power steering lines had been replaced. What I did see also was sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. What I did see also is the steering damper was replaced. Now, first thing I see is the steering damper, and you can see I've kind of checked, there's an oily residue on it. And when I smell it, it doesn't smell like, I don't think it's engine oil. It smells very neutral. And when I look around the area, I just don't see anything else leaking. So again, this is probably something just to keep an eye on, or what we're seeing here, and I'm going to try to determine it, is the actual damper itself, which is a replaced part not too long ago, could be leaking already. What I don't see on this part is any markings to indicate that it's a genuine Mercedes part. So who knows, it could be an aftermarket piece and it could be failing prematurely. Hard to tell, but I'm going to try to double check that and come up with a recommendation after that. But let me show you a couple other things as we move forward. Now our center link, the center drag link here, that also looks pretty fresh. And in fact, our boots look nice and clean. The rubber looks very fresh on them. It's also nice and tight. And I did have someone here yesterday when I was looking at the car, and I had them hold one of the wheels while I sort of pushed on this one a little bit, and we watched and didn't see any movement on the center drag link or anything like that. Now you have your outer tie rods. So a couple things on those. Number one, you got a torn boot on this one, and this does seem to look original to me. Nothing really that tells me it's a replacement. To me, it looks original, but I don't see any indications of replacement. And if I grab this one, doesn't really take a whole lot to pivot this one around. Now, I know you can do that on these, but this one feels particularly loose. We go over to this one. Again, not really sure if it's been replaced or not. This boot looks pretty decent, but this boot, and on the back side, it's actually torn completely. This boot's pretty bad. But if I grab this one, it's a lot harder to move, probably twice as hard to move. So it tells me that this one's probably a little loose. Now, when I drove the car did exhibit a little bit of wandering on the road. The steering was not as tight as it probably could be. There was a little bit of vagueness off center, but not too bad. It wasn't unsafe or anything like that. But I suspect that these tie rods could probably use a refresh. So looking at all this, what I would probably recommend is going with genuine Mercedes outer tie rods, tie rod assemblies. The drag link, I mean, if we're there, we could probably just do it, though it looks fine to me, but considering that it also has 2 joints, probably not a bad idea to do. And then of course you've got your steering damper, which was replaced, but if I do feel that it's leaking oil, I'll probably recommend that as well. Now, one reason I would recommend all of that stuff, and what I see a lot with these systems, especially on the Jeeps and things like that, is every one of these joints, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. If you have a minuscule amount of play in any of those joints, and say they all have a tiny bit of play, like 5% play, well, you add up 5 times 6, that's 30%. So, all right, maybe it's not 30% play in total, but you get the point. It magnifies, it adds up. So if all of these have a tiny little bit of play, that's going to equal a fair amount of play at your steering wheel. So a lot of times if you're just replacing one of these and you're already pulling the thing apart, it doesn't really make sense to skip a piece, especially if you're getting quality parts. Put it all in, be done with it, and then go get your alignment. Because the one thing you don't want to do is say, well, I'm going to put all this in, but this part's $80, I'm not going to do it. But I'm going to pay $150 for an alignment, and then this part goes bad a year later, I replace it, and then I go get another $150 alignment. So unless you find one of those places that still does that lifetime alignment thing where you go, hey, I put a new part on, is it still covered under warranty? So that's kind of the thought here is, and we want to kind of leave that up to the owner and see what they want to do. But I think this outer tie rod is a little weak. This one's probably not as bad. And the little sign of drip on that damper, which is a new part, which is unfortunate. If we deem that that is from that part, then it's something that we're going to want to look at. So just like I said, some things that we found. And again, all in all, this car is in super good condition. So, you know, of all the digging, that's about the only thing that I've really found. That and this oil pan seepage is really about it. And hopefully that's not a spoiler as we go back, but we'll show you why as we continue. Okay, let's move back because these end up being really detailed, which I hope you all like, but if you're like me, you like to just check everything out on the vehicle and really deep dive into it. And that's what these end up becoming. So our transmission looks really, really nice. And again, this is where I started to said, well, hey, is there any paperwork in the car? Because it looked really nice. And then I was curious, well, it looks so nice. Has the fluid been serviced? You know, do I need to do any of that? And then I came back and was doing more inspection, and I noticed the flex disc, which is brand new. And then the transmission mount, which is also brand new, which is awesome. And then I looked, and what I found is that it looks like this transmission has been removed at least twice. So once it was removed to do a rear main seal, which is, again, great that that's been serviced and done. And then it looks like it sprung a leak from the pump assembly and was removed again to, well, I think the thing said R&R transmission and replaced the pump seal. So I don't know if it was fully rebuilt, like rebuilt and reconditioned, or reviewed and repaired. I don't know. But at any rate, it shifts great. The transmission operates really well in the drive, and it's nice and clean. So it appears that a lot of transmission work's been done, and that also probably indicates why some of this is so nice and clean. I wonder if this is even a replacement. This looks so new. So that's good. And everything even too, like I know there's a lot of the vacuum lines and the connectors and everything looks good and clean. Some of that can sometimes need adjustment, and honestly, I think it's fine. So I mentioned that our steering box was rebuilt, and you can see some indications of at least disassembly because we've got a paint mark there to line up the inner shaft of the box to the steering shaft to the housing of the steering box. So that's another indication of that. All of our lines look good on this side. Same on this side. No rust, lots of undercoating. Now I do see here, this is interesting, there's quite a bit of fluid. There's some wetness, dampness on here, and it looks like it starts right here. So right behind the rear transmission cross member. And if we follow it, it goes all the way back. Sneak peek, a little bit on the muffler, and then some even on our rear subframe. So when I look back up here, I see no indications of where this could be coming from. Everything up here is now dry. There's really no indication that this is a current leak. What I believe this is, I noted that the transmission at one point had sprung a leak. I believe that when that leak happened, it basically blew transmission fluid back, and this is just residual from that event. I see no indications of any leaks from anywhere else. So, but very interesting that there's some residual, and you can tell that must have been one heck of a leak because it really sprayed back on the car. Another interesting thing, we take a look at our exhaust. We're about halfway back. Looks like a catalytic converter here. I'm assuming that's a cat and not a resonator. And then we come up here, and the exhaust kind of dual runs from here all the way back, but it's a single side. So we've got our exhaust here on the passenger side, but nothing on the driver's side. Now this is a V8 motor, and typically what you'd see on like a true dual system or an H pipe or X pipe, you'd have one pipe coming down the driver's side, one here, and then they come together in the center. Now some cars have, with V8s, they have a single exit, and they use what's called a Y pipe. Usually on the Y pipe, the exhaust pipe comes down the driver's side, and then it comes in front of your transmission pan, and it connects to the pipe here. But what's interesting about this Mercedes is you don't have that. You don't have the pipe coming down on the bottom, which means the exhaust from the driver's side or left-hand bank has to be crossing over above the transmission and then coming down here. So that's actually really interesting. Okay. Another interesting feature of the exhaust here are these silencers, these mufflers off to the side. As you can see, they kind of come in on each one, go into the muffler. They don't exit out this side. They just cycle around, come out the back. Pretty neat design. And then it all comes out through your dual exit here. All right, now we're back here. Let's take a look at our rear suspension. We've got a rear independent suspension. Here's our differential, our new flex disc on the drive shaft. Our outputs are both dry and look good. This one looks a little shiny, but it's dry. I don't see any leaks. It looks like it's maybe just been cleaned a little bit. And of course, we do see some new hoses back there, so it looks like some of our fuel system stuff was worked at some point. We see up there, see that 612? This is interesting. The other side has the same thing. Let's see if I can see it on camera. Well, there's the unit, but I don't see the mark. I did see it earlier. And basically what that is, this has the self-leveling suspension in the rear. Now, it was an option to have it in the front. I don't see that on this car, but I definitely do see it here in the rear where it was standard. And interestingly enough, you know, like the Lincolns and whatnot, they have the air suspension, Range Rovers have them, things like that, and they use a very similar setup, but with air. In Mercedes, it was all hydraulic. So here you have part of the system. This looks to be a leveling arm, so the kind of your height sensor arm, and that looks like it actually opens a valve in this hydraulic block. So that's actually really cool, and you can see there's a bleeder up there. There's a bleeder on the top. And then those lines go out to the hydraulic units. That's what one of those reservoirs was that we just showed you. And that operates the self-leveling in the rear. Now, one of the cool things about it, on the Lincolns, you kind of have to disable the air suspension before you lift them. And on the Mercedes, I looked in the service manual, there is absolutely zero indication. And from what I researched, nothing you really got to do. You can just lift these up and they compensate and they're okay. They don't freak out and blow out an air shock like might happen on the Lincoln. So if you got a Lincoln with an air suspension, remember to turn it off before you lift it up. On one of these, doesn't seem to be as much of a problem. Fuel pump assemblies. I say that because there appears to be two fuel pumps on the bottom there. And they look very similar to the Bosch units that the Jag uses and a lot of other cars. I think Porsche used them as well back in the day. Some of these hoses were replaced, it looks like, so that's nice. Fuel filter itself, I was kind of assuming that would have to be done, but look, 50K written on it. So thank you, whoever wrote that on there, because if you hadn't written that on there, I would be wondering, even though it looks nice and new, I'd be wondering how old it is and feeling that it had to be done. Now that I know it's only about 2,500 miles old, I know we're in good shape. Brakes are good back here, new brake lines as well. The only real thing of note is our shocks, the rubber the boot, basically the cover, and this happens on pretty much most shocks and struts, even on newer vehicles. It's just torn and fallen down. Shouldn't really affect it, but something to keep an eye on because it can cause these to fail a little sooner, but I don't see any signs of them leaking or anything like that, so I'd probably just leave it as is. Brakes in the back are good. There's a rear differential, and well, I think that's pretty much the end of the line here. All right, so after our little walkthrough there, I did my normal run through again, and we did a deeper inspection. What I found is that the front left tie rod was pretty loose, and well, the right-hand tie rod didn't look that much better, but was still serviceable. Also, that damper seemed to have a little bit of leak to it, even though it looked like it had been replaced relatively recently. It appeared to be an aftermarket part, not a genuine Mercedes. So what I did is I went ahead and, with the owner's agreement, I went ahead and sourced Mercedes genuine parts as best I could, everything except the left-hand tie rod assembly. What I did there was I found some Lemforder tie rod ends, who were the original OEM to Mercedes, and I reused the sleeve, which is in perfect condition on this vehicle, and basically rebuilt that tie rod with new ends from Lemforder. Well, we've gone and gotten it aligned, and well, we're just waiting for our headlight parts. The other things that we did while we had it up in the air was we took care of the wiring on either side that we saw in the inspection. I could not source the plastic clips that go. Those apparently are discontinued and somewhat unobtainium. So I did basically get some conduit that would go around the wires, some nice protective stuff from DEI, some wire wrap, and then I put a grommet around them and used some nice zip ties, unfortunately, but yes, zip ties to hold them to the original assemblies. So I would call it zip tie art, and actually very well done. So I didn't just take zip ties and basically tie them up there. I put some protective coverings and grommets where the zip ties would go, so that we're not doing any risk of stressing those wires. They're about the next best thing to putting them back to the OEM spec. If we can't find that bracket, we can make our own, and that's what we had to do. All right, and with that, that's pretty much it for this video. Oh, wait, let's pause here. I thought we had promised to try those horns out. With that, let's get back to closing out our video. I appreciate you checking this car out with us, and definitely a really awesome W126 Mercedes that we have here in the shop, and we're happy we were able to show it to you. Now we'll follow up and tell you what we do with the headlights once we get those in, and we'll kind of show you what we learned and how you might be able to upgrade yours if you've got a W126. And also we have a little bit of video from when we did the tie rods. We'll see if we can get that up as well. In the meantime, I appreciate you stopping by. Do us a favor, drop us a like and a subscribe. If you like this, we'll have plenty more here on Vortex Garage.